Hello and welcome back. Today we are doing some photoshopping. It's a very valuable skill to have. Loads of workplaces will want it, require it. Now I am a trained Photoshop professional. I've been using Photoshop since I was like 12 years old. Now you don't need the latest version of Photoshop to do what I'm going to show you today. There will be some features that you might not have, but don't worry about those too much because they're not that important. The important ones have been there forever. So it doesn't matter if you're using CS6, Elements 8, or the 2024 CC version. So it really doesn't matter. All you need to have is access to Photoshop and a computer. Your computer doesn't have to be super duper quick, just yet at least. Okay, so let's switch from this view. Oh, also, check out my new background and a nice lovely green table. Lovely, isn't it? So yeah, I'll switch to a face cam view and so you can see what I'm doing on my screen and you can follow along and yeah, let's get cracking. Okay, so now you can see my little pretty face in the corner. You can see what my Photoshop looks like. And when you open up Photoshop, it'll look something a little bit like this. If you haven't used Photoshop before, you probably won't have all of these down here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up an image in Photoshop. So today you click open here, and the first image I'm going to open up is this one, because Photoshop is, well, the stereotype is, can you remove this thing? Or can you make me less spotty? And so I'm going to do both of those, but the first one I'm going to do is make you less spotty. Now, personally, I don't agree with this, but it's a very good skill to have. So I'm going to press Command and 0 to make the image big, and that fits it to the screen. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press V to get the selection tool. This is my safe tool. When you're not using any tool, it's good to be in this one. This is called the move tool. Now, the first thing I do when I open up an image in Photoshop is I drag this background layer onto this little square with the plus on it, and that makes a copy of your layer. Now, when you're working in Photoshop, it's really important to work non-destructively, or as least destructively as possible. And the reason for this is because you want to make sure that you can take things off and go back without worry. Because if you do a whole project and you're working destructively and you're not using layers or masks or anything like that, then you're going to be doing it all on one layer. Then later on, if you decide, oh, I don't like this thing that I did earlier, I'm going to just remove that. Well, you can't. So it's good to work in layers and make sure that you always have a backup. So we're going to work on this duplicated layer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the tools menu and we're going to select the healing brush, or you can press J on your keyboard. Now, there are a few different options. So if you click and hold, you can see all these different options here and it can be quite overwhelming. So we're going to go with the most basic one, which is the spot healing brush tool. Kind of does what it says on the tin. We make sure that our layer is selected that we want to work on. Now, then what we can do is we can zoom in by either pinching and dragging if you're on a trackpad, or you can hold Option or Alt and scroll if you're using a mouse. Now, these are freckles, they're not actually spots, but I don't know, maybe she's self-conscious and she wants to get them gone. So what we're going to do is we can use the square brackets to change our brush size. And if we go up here, we have the brush options. So we can change our size and we can change the hardness. Now the hardness is how hard of a line it leaves. So if you have a really hard brush, it might look a bit unnatural. As you can see, it's difficult to see, but there is a solid line there. Whereas if I press Command and Z or Control and Z, to undo that, and I go to a super feathered brush and I do the same, you can still kind of see where the spot was because it blends in the edges. So you want it somewhere in the middle. I like to leave it around 50%, maybe 60%, and click and it's gone. As you can see, I'm going to make it as small as possible just so it's covered. I'm going to click and it's like it was never there. And then this again, you just go around and click key spots. Now sometimes it doesn't work as well, so you need to use a different tool. So just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to use a different tool. I'm going to undo a couple of those that I just did. And the next tool we're going to use is the healing brush tool. Now, this is massive, so I'm going to use the square brackets to make it smaller. The best thing you'll learn in Photoshop is keyboard shortcuts. The more you know, the easier your life will be. I can promise you that. Again, we want to go up to the brush menu
And I quite like these settings, so I'm going to leave them as they are, but you can change it if you want. If you're using a graphics tablet, you can use pen pressure, but it wouldn't be advised for a healing brush. It's mainly for your brushes. And if you want to turn off or on your brush pressure when using a graphics tablet, just press this button here and that'll do that for you. So now with this, it doesn't work the same as the spot healing brush tool. I can't just click because this will pop up. So what you need to do is you need to find a source point that kind of matches where you want to cover. For example, this shade of skin is the same as this shade of skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to hold Option or Alt and then click, and that will select a source point for me. And now you can see I can move this around and see if it matches. And I'd say that does, so I'm going to click again, and it kind of stamps it. Now there are other tools that do very similar things to this, but I'll get to those in a moment. However, you'll see that if I try and use that source point on this spot down here, it doesn't match. Now to combat that, what we're going to do is we're going to select another source point down here on the darker areas of the skin, click, and you can kind of draw it on, which is why it's called a brush. Now another tool that we can use is the patch tool. I quite like this one. Sometimes it's a little bit Marmite, but with this you can just draw around what you want to cover and then drag it over here. Now it's recommended that you do use an area of the same tone. However, Photoshop does quite a good job of adapting. So if I drag it over to this darker area of the skin, it doesn't really matter too much, which is why I quite like it. You don't have to be too precise. To get rid of this squiggly line, you press Command or Control and D for deselect, and we'll go back to V for our selection tool. So that is how you remove your spots, and you can see the before and after by pressing the on and off on this little eye down here in your layers panel. Okay, so for the next example, I've got this image up, a big yellow sunflower, and the same again goes, so we drag the background layer onto the new layers block to create a copy. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the selection tools. So you want to press W on your keyboard, or it's in your tools panel, it's this one up here. And there are a few different selection tools. The first one we're going to do is the Magic Wand tool. This does everything automatically. So this is good for selecting solid colors and removing the backgrounds of things. So I'm just going to untick that down there so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. But we want to make sure we're clicked on this top layer up here. The Magic Wand tool works on tolerance. Now up here in this menu, you can see the tolerance is set at 32. So if I click on this yellow area to select it, and I don't want to select this sunflower, if I click with a tolerance of 32, then it's going to select some of the flower, which we don't want. So I'm going to press Command and D to deselect it. I'm going to go to this tolerance. I'm going to put my tolerance as 10 and press Enter to confirm it. I'm going to click again, and it's still done a pretty good job. It's done a better job than what it did before, but you can still see there are areas that aren't completely selected, like this area here. So Command and 0 to zoom out, Command and D to deselect. Now we're going to put our tolerance at 1. So only this color and this shade of color will be selected. But evidently that's not enough, because this background, although you can't really tell, is a slightly different color to itself. So we're going to press Command D and set the tolerance at 5. I'll click again, and that's done a much better job, but again there are still areas that aren't selected. So Command D, and you just kind of play around with this until you find one that works best. And that's a little bit better, but still not quite. Put it at 10. Put it at 9. Here we go. That's worked well enough for me, I'd say. Now, again, there are still areas that aren't perfect. What you can do is you go into your selection panel and go onto the quick selection tool, and you can add or detract from the selection by just painting on. Now, we've selected the yellow area, we haven't selected the flower. So if I try and paint on the flower to make this area here covered, it's actually going to deselect even more. So I'm going to undo that by Command and Z. And what you can do is you can hold Option or Alt and it will inverse it. So you're actually removing from the selection by doing this. And if you accidentally do too much, I'm just going to reduce my brush size, but you can let go of Option or Alt and you can paint it right back on. Now, I wouldn't recommend using this for any detailed things, but if you have a solid shape on a solid background that are two different colors and you want to select that shape, then I'd say it's probably worth doing. Just fill these gaps in down there. So this isn't a very precise tool, but it can be quite useful if you have a bold shape. Then what we can do is from here, we can press backspace to delete all that yellow background. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just use this selection brush tool and we'll see how that goes. And you can see it kind of snaps to the edges of things, but not too well. So it's always worth zooming in. Or even using a smaller brush to get these finer selections and really refine. You can spend hours doing this. So we're going to deselect that. And the final selection tool is the object selection tool. Now this is very clever, and what Photoshop will do is it will detect the thing that you want to select, and it's not brilliant with this example, but it will highlight it for you. If you have an older version of Photoshop, it might not do this, but all you need to do is click and it will make the selection. And look at that, that is fantastic. That has worked better than any of them. There are still some areas that aren't perfect, but for the most part, I'd say it's done a pretty good job, and it's really easy to touch this up. So if you have an older version of Photoshop, it will take you a lot longer, but it's not impossible. If you have a new version of Photoshop, I would just use this way. Now, if I want to remove this background and I don't want to remove the flower, go back to my V selection tool. Well, first of all, I can now move this flower around, but I don't want to do that. And I can also delete it, but I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is I want to remove this yellow background. So to do that, all we need to do is hold Command or Control, Shift and I. And what that does, you can't really tell too well, but it inversed the selection. I for inverse. Again, the more keyboard shortcuts you learn, the easier it's going to be. So now this yellow area of the background is selected, and I can hit backspace to delete it. And now I'm left with this, and I press Command and D to deselect and click off of it. And now I've just got this flower, and I can move it around and do what I want with it, which is good if you like doing collages. This is a very handy tool for you. You can see the before and after like that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the color of this gentleman's t-shirt. So again, we'll make it big, fit screen by pressing Command and 0 and drag and drop onto the new layer box. And here we are. We're going to do a couple of things here. We're going to use the selection brush, and we're also going to use the adjustments panel up here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select this guy's shirt. So to do that, we go to our quick selection tool. Now you might be thinking, oh, I can use the magic wand tool because he's pink. And it will do a half decent job. I mean, you need to up the tolerance a little bit. So put it at 20. But this shirt color is a little too similar to his skin tone. As you can see, it's highlighted some of his neck, but not the darker areas down here. So that's not going to work. The object selection tool might, although it might, although it has just selected the entire subject. So that's not what we want to do either. So the quick selection tool is the tool that I would use for this. Make the brush a little bit bigger. And again, you just draw onto this chap here, and it's done a much better job than any of them. And it has selected his neck, but again, you can just press Option or Alt and get rid of that selection. And there we are. Just touch up the edges. Don't forget this little bit down here. Make the brush nice and small. And I would say that's pretty good. So now that we have our selection, we press V to get to the move tool. Now what we can do now is we click this little button down here, which brings us adjustment layers. And what we want to do is we're going to go on hue and saturation. And you can see here, it's automatically made a mask of the selection that I just did. We'll touch more on masking in a little while, but for now we'll just go with it. So what we can do is we click this hue slider, and we can change the color of his t-shirt. Hey, look at that, fantastic. And you can also change the intensity, how saturated. So we're going to make it look kind of realistic. I wouldn't touch the lightness slider. So if you make it too saturated, it's going to look really unrealistic. So it's good to leave it probably just below the middle, and you can change the color to whatever you want. As you can see, I did miss a small piece of the selection down here, but just for the example, we'll leave it at that. And we click off, and there it is. Now the good thing with this is because we're working non-destructively and we're using layers, we can click on this and we've gotten back to this and we can change it anytime we like, even if there's 100 layers above it. Now, let's say I wanted to take that sunflower from here. I would drag and drop into here. I want to change the color of this sunflower that's already selected, and I don't need to select it again. So what I can do is I'll get another hue and saturation adjustment layer and drag it on. And if I change the color now, you'll see it changes the color of everything. And we don't want that. I want a purple sunflower, but I don't want a purple man. Now to combat this, what we can do is if I go into my layers panel and I press Option or Alt whilst hovering over the line between the two layers, you can see that this little box with an arrow pops up. And if you click that, it will clip this adjustment layer to the layer beneath it. And from there we can change it and it will only select the sunflower, and we can just play around with that. So that is how you change the color of things. Now the first thing you're going to get asked if you tell people that you know how to use Photoshop is they'll send you an image and say, hey, can you just get rid of this person in this picture for me? Or can you just do this? Or can you just get rid of this stray hair? Or can you just get rid of the car in the background? And that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do now. Okay, so we're going to remove this seagull up here first. Now to do that, this is quite an easy one because he's got a plain background on him. He's not behind anyone else like this one. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the lasso tool, or L on the keyboard. And we're just going to draw around him like so, making sure not to select anything else or cut through anything. And there we go. Now we have our selection. So if you are using an old version of Photoshop, what I would do is I would just delete it from this layer, and you can tell it's deleted because of the layer underneath it. And what I would do is I make another copy of this layer and I would just drag it across. So make sure this layer is selected. We'll get rid of this one. Command D to deselect. So we're selected the middle layer that's sandwiched between them. And if I move this, I can just roughly guess where that seagull was. And if I put this back on, there you go, you can see I can move this through it and get something that looks a little bit like this. So what I would do is I would merge these two layers together by pressing Command and E, or you can just right click here and see merge layers, and it merges them together. Again, it's a quite destructive way of working, but it's fine because we have our backup here. I didn't want to keep those two anyway. So I'd select my point and I would just color it in pretty much. And it does the job pretty well. Again, you want to re-click to get another sample point, just to make sure that it blends nice and evenly. But you see, this is where you got to get a little bit careful, because if I do this here, it's going to go over this bird and it's going to look weird. So what we want to do, or if our sample point is here, we're going to be painting a wing everywhere. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to make our brush a lot smaller. Option or Alt to select the sample point. I'm just going to go around and blend this in. Now with this area here, we don't want to use this soft brush because it will take away some of our seagull. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to our brush settings, whack the hardness up to, I'd say around, you don't want it all the way, but I would probably put it around 80%. And so now we have this area here. We don't want the pixel grid, so we'll just zoom out just a teeny weeny little bit. There we go. Make our brush size a lot smaller again. Select the sample point. Just color around it like so. And then from there, you can blend it in. and it looks a lot better. This still kind of looks a bit off. It's just a random lighter patch. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the patch tool from earlier. And I like this one because you can just select everything like so. And you can drag it onto an area of blue and it will blend everything in nicely. Command D to deselect. And it's still a bit funny around this tip of the wing. So we're going to go back to our healing brush. Up here. Drop the hardness a little bit. Maybe to 50, 60%. Make the brush size a little bit bigger. And just go around there like so. So there we are. That is where our bird was. As you can see, he's now gone. So now we're going to remove this seagull up here by using content aware fill. So the first thing I would do is I would get the lasso tool or press L on your keyboard and zoom in a little bit. And I just go around this seagull here, making sure not to clip that other seagull. Like so. And now I've got my selection. And I go to this paint bucket here, which is content aware fill, not to be confused with generative fill, because generative fill never ever works. So stick with content aware fill, and this little menu will pop up. Keep your opacity to 100. That means it's completely opaque and you won't be able to see anything beneath it. And the blending mode, keep it normal. Make sure your content is content aware. Click OK, and it will fill it all in. Command D to deselect, and there's a little blotch. That's nothing that can't be fixed with a little bit of patch tool. So now the easy one's done. We're going to move down to this little chap down here who's half on the horizon, half in the clouds. One thing that you can do is you can use the clone stamp tool, which is this one here. You can press S on your keyboard like that. It works similar to the healing brush. So you select a point to sample from like so, and now you have this, and it won't blend as much. It will simply just stamp it on. So again, I wouldn't recommend this for healing spots. Use a spot healing brush tool, as this is more for getting rid of things. Now with this, it has a fixed sample point, so it will always be exactly that distance from where I selected. So you want to select your sample point, for example there, and we're just going to draw along, following that horizon. Try and stay as exact as you can. And you'll notice, sample again, because that's where the seagull started, and we don't want to be drawing a seagull on top of where we wanted the seagull to be removed. There we are. Oops. And there we are. It's gone. We still need to finish off this bit over here, but you can still kind of see where the clone stamp was, and you'll start to see duplicated things in your image. For example, if I started drawing like this, you'll see more seagulls start popping up. So we're going to undo all of that, and the best way to do it, if you have the latest version of Photoshop, utilize the object selection tool. If you have the latest version of Photoshop, utilize the object selection tool. It is extremely good. And I'm just going to click on this seagull here. That's a pretty good selection it's made for me. It's not perfect. So again, we're going to press V to go to our move tool. Go to the select window up here, down to modify, expand the selection by 3 pixels again. We've got a nice little halo. And just use content aware fill. Same settings as last time. Click OK. And it's done a pretty good job, although there is a massive flaw in it. So we'll deselect that and then go over to your clone stamp, and you can kind of just fix things a little bit using this tool. So I've used the clone stamp, and now I'm going to go to my healing brush tool and just see if I can blend this in a little bit better. So we'll go here. I think that looks okay. And we'll zoom out. And it was as if it was never there. Touch it up a little bit more. And there we are, a little before and after. And they're gone. Now, removing things from Photoshop is never going to be perfect, but you can get pretty close. And I think at first glance, this looks absolutely fine to me. There we go. Again, just utilize this object selection tool. It is fantastic, even for getting things behind subjects like this. And then you can just touch it up with your quick selection tool. And that is how to remove things.